sometimes we listen to people in this country who are supposed to be leaders who are so dim-witted that they can actually destroy us, the country, and ultimately send out ripples that might even have an effect in causing wars and destroying the world. One of these people I'm talking about is a person who stood up in front of all kinds of microphones and in front of the press, and he said that this state is where being awake, he used the word woke, comes to die. Now, you see, I would have been embarrassed to say something like that. In fact, if I was in a state where somebody stood up and said that about my state, I would be insulted. This is a place where woke comes to die. This is a place where intelligence comes to die. It's a place where deep exploration of each other's lives comes to die. This is a place where a dream, the greatest dream that has been passed down from one generation to the next, from one civilization to the next, the dream of a world of justice, equity, and compassion. This is the place where it comes to die. And why does it come there in order to die? Because it's like the great teacher said, you cannot wake up those who are just pretending to be asleep. And I think that a lot of the problems that we're having today when it comes to spirituality, comes to religion, comes to philosophy, comes to personal growth, is that many of us are pretending to be asleep when we know full well what's going on in the world. And it's easy to fall into that trap. It's easy to find a way to believe what we know isn't true so that we can feel better and so that we can fit in with our friends and family members. It's easy to go along with things. It's easy to ignore that little voice. And that little voice is there. I would say that is the voice of God in the back of our mind that keeps telling us that something's wrong. But after we ignore that voice too many times, you see, it just gets quieter and quieter, and the voice that we use to deceive ourselves gets louder and louder. And since our society supports ideas that keep us asleep, that keep us from being empowered, that keep us from realizing that we are the creative energy of the universe and using that creative ability to build lives for our families and our communities, since there are people in the system that wants to use our energy for their benefit. Most of the messages that we receive are designed to keep us asleep or make us so afraid of being awake that we never say anything. And so we find ourselves in a world where a man can stand up in a state in front of all of these microphones and say, this is where being awake comes to die, and can ban books, and can ban speech, and can get angry because a theme park uses the word gay. This is the type of madness that we're entering into now. Why is this? I remember a long time ago, and I don't know if I advocate these things that I've heard or not. I sort of look at them and take them for what they are, but I haven't decided if I want to believe them 100% yet. But there was a theory, a very strange theory, that all of these people, all of these souls who didn't make it, all of these people who died and who were warped and twisted and angry and nasty, who didn't make it to paradise, were going to be released again. And they were going to come back during the new millennium and be placed in power to make amends for the bad things that they did before. That was one theory about why things are so crazy now. As I said, I don't know if I believe it or not, but it is a theory that was being passed around back in the 80s by the New Agers. I do find it interesting how many people just lie, cheat, and steal openly, and it seems that there's no morality at all, no empathy for those who are downtrodden or in pain or in suffering. No empathy at all, no love, anti-love. People claim to be Christian, but they are doing the total opposite of what Jesus taught, and they're proud of it. They say that they love the person, yes, but they hate everything about the person and treat them horribly because of that. I just don't understand this type of logic. And I don't understand where spirituality, and I don't understand where religion, and I don't understand where even the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness fits. With one hating someone and treating them horribly just because they are different, because we can't understand them. But when I think about these things, I come to the idea and the realization that there is one major problem within the human being that is causing every other problem. And that major problem is this: every person thinks that their ego or their identity they have chosen is the only true and correct one, and that their perceptions are more close than being true than everyone else's. And they only think that those who are like them are good, are the best people. And in order to prove this, what they do is they gather together in groups, create a collective identity, a group identity that supports their ideas, and then they force their ideas out into the world. As they wipe out other people's thoughts and ideas, that verifies to them that theirs is the best. Because unfortunately, during our lifetimes, and that before us, this idea came into being that God was a power over God. If you ever look at some of the history of the knights in Europe, it can tell you where this idea of this power over God came from. Basically, what happened in Europe was that people were serfs. What does it mean to be a serf? It meant that the landlord, the one who owned the land, owned the people. The people were seen like cattle or horses or livestock, you see. And this was all of France and England and Italy and Spain. People were little more than slaves. They were attached to the land. If you bought the land, you got the people, you see. And what happened was when the kings began to fight wars against each other, the nobles, if there was a great person who really fought and really supported the king, they became a hero and they became a knight. Each knight was given land or a fiefdom, and it was a land that they were allowed to rule over, and each one was allowed to carry a sword, Before that, your average individuals were not allowed to carry a sword. It was against the law. But once you became a knight, you could carry a sword. You could strike people down if you got in a fight because you were nobility. You were better than them. You had proven yourself. And so what happened was you became the owner of a fiefdom and the owner of all the serfs on the fiefdom. And there were many battles and many fights between the knights, and every once in a while when there were land disputes, they would have a battle where they would just throw several knights in, all fighting. And the idea was that the one who won the battle because they were sanctioned by God. In other words, if they could kill the other people, it was because God was showing that they were right. Now, can you see today how we have picked up that idea of this power over God, and we think that if we can go out wiping out people and we don't get killed, or if we have politicians who are tricksters and liars and cheats who never seem to get caught and who make a lot of money, or immoral people that we hold up as examples to our children because they made it to the top, even if it was sleeping with everybody. Do you see where that idea came from? That idea is the internalized oppression that has been taking place for generations in the culture that came from serfdom. And that is the culture that most of the Western world and colonized world has been raised in. So that little trace of thinking that if something bad happens to you, God is against you, and if something good happens, which proves God is for you, and if someone has more power than you, it proves that they are closer to God. That is the world we live in. That's the world that has been created for us. That's the world that has been passed down from generation to generation, and that world, that ideology, has infiltrated the churches, has infiltrated now yoga centers, spirituality centers. It infiltrates everything ultimately, because that's all that we can see and hear until we decide to wake up. But they don't want us to wake up. They call it being woke, you see. And they say we're having a battle against woke because all those woke people are causing problems. Those woke people are making us uncomfortable. Those woke people are comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable, which is what the church is supposed to do. Shaking people up in order to get them to grow. If there is no shaking up, if there is no stirring up, if there is no confusion for a few moments, people never grow. Things remain the same. Truth is that they don't stay the same. What happens is that the growth goes in the wrong direction, and it becomes warped and stagnant. You see, societies and ideas and all of that are somewhat like a pond. If you go and find a pond in the woods, you see, it can stay healthy as long as there is new water coming in and new water going out. The amount of water coming in and going out, if it remains balanced, keeps the pond thriving. and keeps the life within that pond healthy. But if there is no new water, the pond becomes stagnant. It grows rancid. All of the funguses and all of those negative things, algae and all of the things within that pond begin to grow to such an extent that they overwhelm the pond and they suck all the oxygen out of the air. And all of the fish and tadpoles and all of those things either have to start leaving or they die. We are in a system now where people are trying to resist personal and spiritual growth. They're trying to resist our ability to advance as human beings and to reach a higher level of understanding where we will see the truth and know the truth and recognize that we are the truth. It's almost like a mother who is about to give birth trying to refuse to let that child be born, which will ultimately mean her death. Our system is attempting not to let the new human being, the new nation, the new society be born. And as long as we allow this to happen, we will be suffering the dire consequences of stagnation, of death, and of all of those organisms that don't care about the environment, who only care about multiplying and getting power. We will allow them to keep growing and growing and growing until there's no oxygen for anyone else. And we can see this now. If we look at a whole spectrum of people and understanding, we see there are different types of personalities. You have the kind, gentle people. You have the mean, aggressive people on one end, the kind and gentle on the other. And there is a spectrum. It balances out as long as there is diversity in a group, where there are a lot of people who can change ideas and thoughts and speak with each other. Because sometimes you need people who are aggressive. Sometimes you need people who are not. Sometimes you need people who are thoughtful. Whatever the problem comes up, the problem that comes up is what determines what type of person you need. But if you have all aggressive people trying to do health care or trying to work to feed the poor, that doesn't work too well, does it? If you have warmongers who are going out and trying to talk peace with other countries, peace by putting nuclear missiles and nuclear submarines next to another country, that doesn't work too well. Those people shouldn't be doing that. Our problem, I think, is that we are letting these dull and aggressive people into places of power where they don't deserve to be, and we are going to pay the price if we don't begin to speak up and admit that we are woke. Being awake, and I mean seeing the way the world works and being responsible for our own actions and responsible for keeping out the lies, the injustice, and the foolishness. Keeping it out of our communities and out of our minds is totally necessary if we want this world to survive. It's time to stop pretending to be asleep. Even the fact that a foolish person could get on the radio and say this is a state where woke dies just is amazing to me. The state where they took every person and made a list of hundreds of thousands of people's names and didn't let them vote without the names being correct, without the dates, without the races, without anything. They just grabbed hundreds of thousands of people in a list and said they were felons and got away without letting them be able to have their constitutional right to vote. This is what I mean by the angry, the violent, and the aggressive taking power. And as long as those of us who are woke or awake, as I call it, as long as we pretend to be asleep, they will grow more and more. Cancer in the human body is very interesting. There is supposed to be a mechanism in the human body, a self-regulating mechanism. When a cell becomes cancerous, it's almost like it becomes demented or insane, and it begins to breed over and over again, not caring about the rest of the body, and it becomes a danger, it becomes a poison. Now when this happens, the body usually destroys that cell, but these cells actually figure out a way to disguise themselves, and they disguise themselves so that the rest of the body does not realize that they are mad and a danger. They keep sending out signals that disguises their madness, and then they keep multiplying and multiplying and multiplying until they become tumors. Big clumps of flesh not dedicated to the body, but only stealing and taking the resources of the body. And then they send out these little trails or roots or things that could be compared to actually roads or highways. A tumor, you see, looks a lot like a city. And all of these little roads go out into the healthy flesh, and what they do is they steal the oxygen and nutrition from the healthy flesh and bring it in to their own little clump of cells. It's almost like some other body is trying to create itself within the larger body that is distinct from the larger body, and eventually the poison and the theft of nutrition causes the whole body to die. As we look around this country right now, and as we look around many parts of the world, as we see our leadership across many spectrums, and I'm not talking about Democrat, I'm not talking about Republican, I'm not talking about Catholic, I'm not talking about Protestant, I'm not talking about Islamic, I'm not talking about Judaic, I'm talking about across all spectrums. We find people who are behaving like cancerous cells. And not only are they stealing all of the resources and causing all the other people, all of us, to suffer, not only are they doing that, no, they're reaching out to other cancer cells, pulling them all together into a network. And as they do this, they are actually destroying the whole world, species by species. Thousands of species each day die because of what human beings have done in going out and developing land, getting rid of wetland, dumping pollution all over the place. And now, due to global warming and all of the flooding that would take place and the extreme storms, these cancerous people are going to kill the body eventually. And it's very funny, you see that when a body gets a disease, what it usually does, it gets a fever. It raises its temperature high enough to try to destroy the disease. Is it any wonder that the earth is right now trying to raise the temperature of its body high enough to destroy the disease? And that disease that it is trying to destroy is a small percentage of human beings who insist on staying asleep and who insist on manipulating people so that they are afraid to say, I am awake. It's time to stand up, because if we don't stand up, our children, our children's children, and this world, as we know it, will perish. And as we know, bullies, criminals, sociopaths, and psychopaths do not stop doing what they're doing if we try to accommodate them. They need boundaries. They only escalate if we keep letting them go. So it is best, I think, the only thing for all of us, for any of us who are daring to say that we're awake and to move beyond all of the false ideologies we are presented with each day, it is time for us not to go out to the world to save people by getting them to believe anything or to repeat back some prayer. It is time for us, through our lifestyles, through our understandings, and through speaking the truth, not to only go out trying to save one person. It's time for us to save ourselves. It's time for us to save the world. Because, as the teacher Krishnamurti once said, we are the world, if we can see it in the greater sense. It's time for us to save the world.